Hello, and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm Francesca, your AI presenter. This episode is a little different. Our host, Dr. Nia Thomas, recently connected with Turab, whose videos on Instagram and YouTube aim to generate more thoughtful leaders and better workplaces. As part of the TURABIFY movement, Turab interviewed Nia, and they talked about leadership, management, self-awareness, recruitment, and more. It was such a great conversation. We're bringing it to you today as a TURABIFY takeover. Looking forward to having you on our learning journey.
I think as humans, we're basically looking for novelty. It like helps us to rationalize existing, probably, because we're like, okay, yes, we're alive and we have new things that are coming up in our life all the time. But in order to create experiences that are new, or to give ourselves the opportunity to do those things, we have to be okay with being let down. A lot of these people that I've worked with in my life in organizations and clubs, they're like, oh yeah, we have leadership experience and we do all this stuff. And then they show up and I'm like, okay, well, where is all this stuff, right? Like your communication isn't great. You don't end up texting back at the right time. You don't email back properly. You don't show up necessarily on time. And then I guess the hardest thing, besides those two kind of teachable things, the hardest thing is actually that vision, right? Saying, okay, this is where we need to go.
Yeah, interesting. I had a conversation with somebody this week who I sort of sprung a podcast interview on her. So we ended up having a really good conversation, unexpected, as sometimes these conversations end up being really excellent. And she talked a lot about people coming out of universities that weren't really ready for the world of work. So she had a young team, and one of the things that she does is really nurture them in all of those things that wrap around the academic stuff that you learn in university. You know all the theory, etc. But how do you live that? How do you go home? How do you manage a house that maybe you've never lived on your own before? How do you manage your finances? And she was saying that financing was a big issue for lots of new people coming out of university. So I was very impressed that she was actually considering those things. And I suppose 20, 30 years ago, organizations would have said, sorry, this is pastoral care. This is not for us. That belongs with mum and dad. Mm-hmm. But she was saying, actually, this isn't about that. This is about how you bring all of those things into the world of work. So it was a really interesting conversation. It'll be going live in a couple of weeks if you want to hear the rest of it.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch it. No, your podcasts are awesome. Absolutely incredible.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so glad that there's people in the world that are trying to spread these messages about leadership, because I think we need it. We need it as a species. Like where we're going, where globalization and stuff, and how political, the political makeup of the world right now. We really need, good, strong-hearted people with good vision to kind of stand up and be like, I'm willing to take this responsibility. So I think things like conversations like this really, really can help the next generation or even people around us,
Yeah, definitely. And polarization is really concerning me, because I think over my 25 years in the world of work, I think we were probably slightly to the left of centre, slightly to the right of centre. But now organizations, as well as the individuals that work in them, are really becoming polarized. You're either this or you're that. And I think that does worry me. I've got this utopian view of what government should look like. And I think I've watched it on a film somewhere, and I've thought, oh, that's a really good idea for government. Is that actually we have lots of different parties putting forward their different manifestos for education or social care or health or roads or whatever it might be, and that public is allowed to vote on it, so that you don't make a choice about a party, you make a choice about a policy. And I think that's democratization, and it'll move us away from this polarization of I'm either red or I'm blue, because actually the world is far more complex than it was. It's far more connected than it was. And therefore I've got this idea that let's just pick the best policy. I don't care what color you are, which, whether you're red or blue or green, right. It doesn't matter, because it's the policy that I'm interested in, what it delivers. So that's my utopian view of democracy for the next, 50 years.
There was a professor in high school when I was in junior year. I went to Louisiana and she was teaching civics. And she said, and I was like starting this Model UN club and I was doing all this stuff. And we had a conversation and she said, when you're young and you're not liberal, you're not a kind person or you're not
Okay.
compassionate or you're not really paying attention, right? Compared to your cohort. When you're older and you're not conservative, she said you're an idiot. So
Oh, how
it's like
interesting.
there's like I'm beginning at least to realize in my research of what's going on in the world and a lot of my assumptions about how governments work and a lot of this stuff, like, yeah, the reality is you need a really broad view in order to really understand what's going on and like
Yeah.
what's actually good for the future of the people that you serve or the things that you stand for. Because I think I at least have this tendency that when I respect someone, that I'll basically follow their judgments about every
Yeah.
particular issue.
Mm.
And I think that's the beauty of being a leader and a beauty of being the influencer, because you actually have a lot more span than I think we assume that we do. But that also makes it so that if we don't do the research and we don't have multiple of those people that we're looking up to and having perspectives, that we can get really pigeonholed into believing something that might
Yeah.
not be true at all.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm interested, you mentioned different generations there. I'm hearing far more people talking about this phenomenon that we're moving into, that we're going to have around 5 generations in the workplace at the same time, which has never happened before. So we've got the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, all working together, and possibly into the early 70-year-olds, where we haven't had that need before. But what we're finding with the cost of living crisis is that people are having to come back into the workplace where they would have retired and moved on to do other things. So I think that all of those generations coming together, interesting that you're saying there's this view that if you're younger, you're more liberal, and if you're older, you're more conservative. I think that generalization of different generations concerns me, because I think is that the tip of the iceberg of ageism. Um,
Hmm.
and how then do we move to this humanization of the workplace, the individualization of our working practices? Because what I don't want is for organizations to say, well, we will do this for Gen Z, we'll do this for Gen Alpha, and all the X's, we'll do that for them. But what if that isn't the case? What if you've got somebody who may have a date of birth that fits in one generation, but actually they like the views and they follow the examples of a different generation? So I'm concerned about pigeonholing people to their age groups. I would rather us work out where people's strengths and areas of interest lie and focus on that. Again, I suppose it comes back to the conversation about polarization, because what we're doing by talking about all these generations as separate entities is we are creating polarization.
Hmm.
So I'm this is me on my soapbox, and I keep talking about this.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about somebody as their generation. Let's talk about them as an individual who's really good at accountancy. They're really good at maths, and actually they're the person that you need to help you doing the detail. Whereas you may have somebody else who's the customer services expert. They have that kindness, they have that warmth, and they're able to do your customer service function exceptionally well. Their age and their generation is of no consequence.
Right. And being a leader, like you kind of have to separate that in your head, right? Like at the end
Yeah,
of, like even me when I hire people at the dental practice, sometimes I'm like, oh, is this person teachable? Right? But that's
yeah,
that's a quality for every
yeah,
that's an individual quality. That's not
yeah,
necessarily an age quality, right?
absolutely.
So the thing that I wanted to say, there's two main points. The concept of generational housing, right? In certain cultures, for instance, from my culture and Pakistani culture, a lot of people spend their lives with their families. So the
Mhm.
grandparents, the parents, the grandchildren, like everyone's in the same kind of household, right? And through that, you get tremendous amounts of perspective. And
Yeah,
even if we are driven to make our own mistakes, which I think we have to learn from our own mistakes to some capacity always, at least we'll have the context to know what we're looking for along the way. Right? Like if there's something that comes up that we're like, this kind of signals what my grandparent was talking about, or what my parent talks about, there's a caution, there's a wisdom that goes along with that. So along with, trying to make sure that we look at everyone kind of as human beings, I think it's also really important to realize that difference perhaps in age can be really beneficial.
Oh, definitely. Cognitive diversity is where it's at. So I would far rather us talk about cognitive diversity than age diversity, because actually it's the cognitive diversity. Again, I was talking to somebody earlier this week about this idea that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your background is, culturally, religious background, that actually if you all came out of the same university, you were probably taught by the same professors and the same syllabus, and it's quite likely that you're going to come out with the same idea. So are we recruiting people from a place where you've got groupthink? So, if you're recruiting somebody who has a broad spectrum of family who can be giving them different ideas and different perspectives, that's what we're looking for, cognitive diversity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's I've come to a point where I'm sure you've reached this with being as busy as you are and as involved in different things. As leaders, one of the main thing that we have to watch out for is recruitment, right? Like hiring and firing and and positioning people in the right place. So, me being a young leader, I'm obviously getting disillusioned about certain things, right? Mm-hmm. Like where you may have faith that a person can do this task or that they can grow into this role, but that perhaps with enough time they can, but perhaps it's not worth the allocation of resources to get them to that level. You know what I mean? And
it's nurturing and mentoring. And I think you have to have an organization that buys into that. I think that has to be one of their values. If you're not into that and you're applying for an organization where that isn't one of their values, or learning or nurturing or mentoring, then it's probably just not the right organization for you. So but going back to your point about recruitment, I often say recruitment's got a lot to answer for. And what I'm not hearing is that people are stepping out of the very traditional form of recruitment. It's you put your advert out, somebody applies, they come for an interview for 45 minutes, they leave a sparkle or shine, you might call them back for a second time and it's a yes or a no. And that really is, as much as we would want to diversify that method a little, that's pretty much what we're doing. But I spoke to Tessa Clark, and she's the chief executive of Olio, and it's a very popular global food sharing app. And she was talking about they recruit for mission obsession. And I thought that's really interesting. And she talked about having the conversation interview and then allowing people to present, but not necessarily in a traditional PowerPoint kind of way, giving people an opportunity to present on one of those missions. And they can do that any way they like. And she used the word audition. And I've heard the word audition used by other people who've said, how do we diversify our recruitment method? When I spoke to Matt Dunsmore, he talked about where would we recruiting from? So that, again, this is the cognitive diversity conversation. And he was saying he recruits from various places so that you don't get this groupthink. But again, you have to recruit from a place, you have to have a process, and then you have to have a very clear support policy for learning and development once you get the people in the organization. So I think recruitment is just part of a long pathway that should go from the minute you put that advert out to the minute that somebody leaves the organization. So that you should think of it as a long continuum, because it's the career pathway. So from that minute that somebody first hears about your organization, whether it's an advert in a magazine or a newspaper or a website, or they hear somebody who already works in the organization talking about it, what they say and what is written down is really important, because you don't get a second chance to make a first impression.
Yeah. Yeah, the recruitment method that I'm using is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
You go and the
yeah,
traditional thing. I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking very seriously about the presentation part that you were talking about,
yeah.
because to a degree, though I want to get, when you're starting on a business, you have limited funds. You only have so much time and energy that you can motivate or draw to actually inspire someone, let alone teach them the skills that they may need, right? And I think I have made the mistake as a young leader, someone that hires people, to assume that if someone can talk about doing a task, that they can do the task, right?
Oh, talking the talk and walking the walk.
And those are completely different things. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, and what I'm going to try to do from now on is very much that project thing where it's like, okay, you're signing up for this role and you're claiming that you have the skills to
Mm.
do this role properly. Show me.
Yeah.
Show me that you can do this role, and give some sort of assignment or some sort of diagnostic to be like, okay, this is the data that you have and this is the thing that you need to get. And if you can't get there, or you require too much help to get there, then perhaps you should work for an organization or give yourself the opportunity to learn that skill better. Now, the issue that I come across is that a lot of people that are looking for jobs these days, and a lot of people that are applying for this kind of secure position, they don't want to put in the work up front, right? So you
Okay.
say to them, okay, all right, I need you to format 6 emails that you would send to someone in a CRM, which is your basically a software that allows you to communicate with a variety of different customers. And they'll say to me that, okay, yeah, if you put me on your payroll, then I'll do that. And I say to them, well, I'm only going to put you on your payroll if you're capable of doing this, right?
Yeah.
And then a lot of people get into this kind of philosophy that, oh, my hours are worth an X amount of time, and um, because you're giving me this assignment, you don't trust me, and they get all emotional about it. And I think as leaders, we need to understand that we really only have so much time. Like at the end of the day, if you want to go and just bleeding heart put all of your time and energy into raising people up and investing in their time and their ability to do a skill that they should be able to do when they first start the job, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot. You have to be very, very certain that the person that you're hiring can indeed, at the very minimum, do the job without support.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think employees and organizations is a two-way street, isn't it? You've got to meet your employer halfway, but they've got to come and support you to do that. Interesting that you're talking about recruitment, particularly there. Those kind of exercises, I would expect it to be part of the interview. So, you've applied, you filled out the paperwork, you now have 45 minutes to format these 6. Let's see how you do. And actually, if that at that point, then you have a candidate who says, "No, I don't want to do this. This isn't for me." You've already got a shortlisting process, you got a sifting process that's sort of taking care of itself. But I think that's maybe it's a conversation about what is written in the advertisement, so that people understand what it's going to look like when they get to the interview stage. So it'll be a conversation, it'll be an exercise that might look something like this, or it might look something like that, so that people know what they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we don't want is to have people who start the process and get halfway through and then suddenly have a surprise because nobody told them what the recruitment process was going to be. And if that happens, what you're going to have is those individuals taking it right back into the community to say to all of their friends, hey, don't apply for that organization because they're going to throw a grenade into the middle of the process and you're going to end up having to do something that you really weren't expecting. And I
Mm.
think it's, uh, I often talk to people about introverts and extroverts. And the recruitment process, when you have to, you don't give people much time to reflect. That is far more difficult for introverts. So I
Mm.
wonder if you have a recruitment process that does throw a grenade in and say, surprise, you need to do this as part of your recruitment process, you're suddenly taking out a lot of the introverts from that potential cognitive diversity that you want in the organization. So maybe that preparing people and saying it's a 3-stage process, you'll be with us for an hour and a half, and these are all the things that you're going to be doing as part of your recruitment. And the third part is the stage is yours, do whatever you want to do to demonstrate to us that you can meet our mission, that you are obsessed with our mission, just like we are. So I think when you're thinking about different neurodiversity, if you want diversity, you have to be the one that's demonstrating diversity right from the beginning.
What I've come across recently is I do have a bleeding heart, and I love seeing the most out of people. Like TURABIFY, the whole brand is about helping catalysts in society who are defined as people that want to become the most authentic selves, to serve them, to make sure that they have the tools and the resources. And I think when we start out in our leadership role, we really want to help everyone. We really, the best of us, I believe the service-driven ones of us, like really just have a desire to help people.
Yeah.
And with that deep empathy comes a tremendous amount of learning that needs to happen about the capabilities of the people, and also our threshold for what we're willing to invest our time and resources. And so, though I want to provide every single person with the education that will allow them to actualize their potential and become the most authentic selves, right? The people that are actually dedicated to that will go through the process. Mm-hmm. The people that are actually dedicated to that will pay to get the experience and knowledge. And the people that are not necessarily dedicated to that will take for granted the things that you are providing them with in terms of their growth opportunities. For instance, I have hired multiple people in the last couple of months, and I've offered masterclasses to them, my username and password, right? Masterclasses that they'll have access to. And they have gone out of their way to say, yes, us watching these masterclasses, we should get paid for. Now, to me, I'm like, okay, first of all, you would have never had this opportunity of getting this masterclass probably anywhere else, right? On top of that, you're saying that the money that I spent, the energy that I spent to get this thing, that you spending your time and money and energy means that I have to pay you for that. Right. So as an employer, it becomes a situation where you're thinking to yourself, like, these people probably have not offered particular opportunities to others to know what it feels like to be on that end, and to know what it feels like to invest the time and energy to build someone up. And I think it's very important as a leader to kind of get your hands dirty, do the entire gamut of what you believe should be done well in leadership. Learn from that. Try to stay optimistic in the process, because business is not easy. But to realize that really, like, people can only really meet you where they're at. Even down the line, when you invest these hours and this money, like, you have to be able to read people's souls to a degree in order to know what you're dealing with.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you on part of that.
Okay.
So my experience, I've certainly had that experience of individuals who have grasped any opportunity and they've run with it in their own time, weekends, evenings, etc. The flip side of that is that I've also worked with lots of people who work in the childcare sector, and the childcare sector is minimum wage in most roles, and they are expected to work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 5 days a week. And they are then expected to do the training that is part of their role outside of that time, unpaid. Mm-hmm. That I don't agree with. So maybe it's if I can consider your example. So if, as a dental practitioner, you wanted one of your hygienists to upskill in a particular course because your patients were demanding a new technique that had just been developed, I think your expectation would be that you paid for the course and you allowed them time to do it. However, if you have one of your dental nurses who is also interested in maybe retraining as an accountant, and you say, oh, I heard about this really interesting course, you probably wouldn't say, and I'll pay for you to be an accountant, unless, of course, you want that nurse to stay in your organization. You would say it's outside of the parameters of your role. Absolutely support you to do it. If you need to take some of your holiday to be able to finish off some of your assignments, just book your time off as you would ordinarily, and you will support them. But you may not decide to pay for that course. So I think for me, it's about your expectation. Is it part of the role, in which case the organization should be paying you? Or are you providing the information as a, hey, if you want to go out and learn about things in your own time, that's fine by me, and I will provide you this information, but I'm not able to pay you, or that's not something that's part of your contract. But hey, if you want to go and do it, you're very welcome, and I'll support you. So I think there are two very different kinds of workplace learning, or one that's going to support you directly to do your role, and one that's going to provide that, as I said before, the wraparound element that we talked about for those new people coming out of university into the world of work. So bit of a challenge to you there.
Yeah, I think it's very important to, and thank you for that. That really helps. I think it's very, very important to separate what type of work that we're going to do. So if it's a 9 to 5 job where you're expected to be like in the office for X amount of time, and that's how you get paid, that's a very different scenario than being an independent contractor that has a contract with a very small company, and you're kind of expected to keep track of your own hours outside.
Oh yeah.
That and I guess what I was talking about is in particular pertaining to that situation,
Okay.
where people are at home doing the work, that it's very hard to keep track of, how much can like when you first hire someone, how much can someone feasibly do in X amount of time, right? And are they being honest with what they're actually doing, let alone do you have the evidence essentially to determine whether or not they're doing what they're saying they're doing. And all that infrastructure is very, very important, especially for those leaders that have that bleeding heart, that believe in the best in people and all of that. I really encourage, if you're going to have any sort of auxiliary people that are doing work for you, to have a common drive, like a Google Drive or something, where they're uploading their work, where you can see all of it, to make sure that there is tangible evidence for the things that they're actually doing, just to be on the same page as everyone else,
Okay, so right, so what you're talking about is that out of sight, out of mind. Are you able to produce something tangible so that I can see what you've done? My world of work is a bit different, because often my colleagues are knowledge workers, and they will not be producing one report a day for the next 30 days. That's not how we work. So productivity looks different for us. And I guess I was thinking about this idea that sometimes leaders have to go first, and I think leaders have to demonstrate the trust first. If you do have somebody external that you've never worked with before, or maybe you haven't developed that relationship of trust with them, maybe you start with a small contract, but you make sure that the schedule of that contract is very, very clear about both your outputs and your outcomes. Because I think what you've talked about really is outputs. I want to see 20 documents, and I want to see those Excel spreadsheets completed, and I want to see the whatever they are, that they're very tangible. And I think that starts from that contract, because then you have an opportunity to have monitoring conversations. So I think that's the difference when you have somebody external working with you versus somebody internal. So if you have somebody internal, you'll be having regular supervision. You'll be able to have performance conversations about outputs, about outcomes, whether it is 20 documents or whether it is having meetings with external colleagues or developing relationships, which are really difficult to measure. Versus external, you almost have to develop that same kind of relationship so that you build up that trust. But I think as a leader, you've got to go first, and you've got to demonstrate that trust. And that isn't in the way that I think you're worried about. That is it fluffy? Is it soft? Is it that you're going to let people just get away with things, so that if they're not delivering, it's okay, it'll be fine. No, I have high expectations and I have high standards. That's why we've got a very short contract. We have regular monitoring, and I've got clear outputs and outcomes for your role. If you're not meeting them, that'll be the end of the relationship, but the very small contract that we will have to start with. And I think that's a good way. And it clearly sets out your stall from the very beginning. But sometimes I think you've got to work with individuals, particularly in our new hybrid way of working. I think you have to go through that a few times too. Sometimes it doesn't go so well, and the next time it'll be better, and the time after that it'll be better. But we don't always get along with people.
And that's part of the risk of trying to build anything, right? It's just it's a people game. I mean, all of this stuff is just you have to understand human nature, and you have to understand the randomness of the universe to a degree, right? Like how unique individuals can be.
Yeah. So John Rennie actually says leadership is the people business, and he's spot on. It's
hard because of that, right? We have to be very in tune with our emotions. We have to be very in tune with how we deal essentially with our emotional states as leaders, because I wrote something down recently. It was, if you want new experiences in life, which is essentially my measure of how interesting someone's life is. I think as humans, we're basically looking for novelty. It like helps us to rationalize existing, probably, because we're like, okay, yes, we're alive, and we have new things that are coming up in our life all the time. But in order to create experiences that are new, or to give ourselves the opportunity to do those things, we have to be okay with being let down. We have to be very, very okay with being let down. And that is something that I'm learning as a young leader, to go head first and hit and be the one that's performing, and then, just look behind you and realize that perhaps some of the people fell behind that you thought would be able to keep up. It's a constant, and hiring and firing people, particularly firing people. Hiring people is quite easy, but getting rid of people, that's right? Hard. Yeah, because you have to then think to yourself, okay, well, what the hell were they even doing? Okay, how do I now occupy this thing that they were doing? Do I have to find the right skill set, or do I have to find the right personality, or do I have to find both? So it's
mission obsession.
Yeah, and it like I had to fire someone on Friday from my team, which sucked. But at the end of the day, like, you have to know what you stand for. You really, because this world isn't very fair. Like, the fairness has never existed in nature, and it sure as hell doesn't exist with humanity. So it's you have to know how much pain you're willing to put up with. And the idea, in my opinion, should always be to increase that threshold over time as a leader, because you're going to have to get uncomfortable in order to grow, in order to expand. But please, what do you think?
Yeah. So my thought was resilience. And I think that's what the word that I would use to describe what you were talking about from the perspective of the leader. As you said, I think that where you get used to it or you become hardened to it, I would definitely guard against that, because what you don't ever want to lose is that human side, that you don't want to become hardened to it. That actually every time you fire somebody, you should always come away and think, that wasn't an easy thing to do. I've got better at it over time. And I've become more resilient at bouncing back from doing it. But actually, if you can walk away without feeling anything, that's the point at which you're going to go, oh, I need to stop for a moment and I need to rethink. And I think in terms of resilience, we're not necessarily talking about that in terms of all of those different factors that make us more resilient, because going to a course today on resilience is not going to make me resilient tomorrow, because resilience is something that I built up when I was 2 or I was 7 and I fell off my bike and I worked out what to do because there was nobody around, or
it's
when
earned. Resilience is earned.
Yeah, yes. And I suppose it's very like trust. Trust is something you can't just do. it's something that you have to develop and you have to grow and you have to work at it, and lots of different factors. Resilience is the same, that you have to develop that from within, but never get to the point where things bounce off you. You should always have that heart. You should have, there has to be a bit of a soft center there, because then I would worry about your leadership.
And being someone that knows, that has the intention of changing every 5 years, and making sure that I'm upgrading my philosophies and my skills and whatnot. It's very tempting. It's very tempting to be closed off, to lack the emotion, because it's so much easier.
Yeah, it certainly is.
But by comparison, it makes life so much less satisfying.
Yeah, and we did that. That's the Industrial Revolution. That's the industrial paradigm that we lived through, where people could get fired and it just bounced off the bosses. We've moved on from then.
I would say partially, probably. I mean, you probably know. I think the larger an organization gets, the more difficult it is for the leaders to be, like the higher up leaders at least, to be connected to the people that are joining up.
Definitely.
And really, from my initial assessment of it, it just comes down to consistent communication with the leaders, and all the way down, just trickle down to like check in at least a couple times a week with how people are feeling and what things are changing, whether or not people are meeting their expectations. The hard part is getting that together.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen by osmosis. And something that became very evident in my research was strategic level disconnect. That's the name I've given it. And it is, especially within organizations that have lots of hierarchical levels or tiers of within the organization, that strategic level disconnect from the individuals in the C-suite, right at the very top of the organization, to the people who are working at grassroots and are actually seeing the customers, seeing the patients. What I found in my research, that strategic level disconnect meant that often strategies and policies that were determined at the very top, by the time they got to the people who were actually doing the work at the front line, it wasn't achievable or it was unrealistic. So inclusive decision making was a mitigator to that, which is exactly what you were talking about. It's that inclusion. But again, it doesn't just happen. You have to have people at the executive level, the C-suite, who are being very purposeful about having conversations, going to different parts of the organization, being seen, having conversations. So yes, communication, relationships, listening, visibility, humility, vulnerability, all of those things. If you're still working in an organization that's quite hierarchical, and you're right, we are still moving from that industrial paradigm into the knowledge era. But I think that you really have to work on that to be able to squash those levels down, so that actually your communication with people in the front line of your organization is very quick, it's very responsive, and you are visible as a leader. I once worked with a chief exec who was called the Invisible Man. And I guess I was okay with that. What I wasn't okay with was that I heard that he knew that he was called the Invisible Man, and he still let that happen. That's what I had a problem with. So let's squash those. Even if we can't squash the layers, let's get that communication squashed so that it can happen far quicker.
I think it's very important to, when there are larger organizations coming on, that it's very important to designate the person who's going to be at least the face, because when we're talking about introverts and extroverts, at the end of the day, like that exists at all different levels.
Sure.
And really, I mean, from everything that you said, and my initial assessment, and based on Natalie Dawson, who works with Grant Cardone, who's kind of part of the systems creation of a very large corporation, she says that having daily meetings, quite literally daily meetings, that are mandatory, that people have to come to and check in and make sure that they're consistently updating what they've done. But also as a leader, being there, showing up in the morning when people are looking tired and don't want to be there, and then being like, yes, you will give me your energy and your time. right? It sets a very different expectation because it's like, okay, every day or every week that goes by, we don't just wash over this, right? Like whatever discomfort or things that came up this week or yesterday are addressed so that we don't have a system that breaks over time. You know, the we're kind of upkeeping the system and making sure that all of the little parts of it are being augmented with time instead of having to come back 6 months later and being like, holy shit, like how do we solve this massive problem that people aren't getting X thing that they've needed for 6 months? At that point, you might not be able to.
It might be too far down the line. I wonder about those kind of meetings. I think if you're in a traditional type of organization and you're telling everybody they have to come to a meeting once a day, every day, and expect to see you there, for me, that's bordering on micromanagement. However, if what you're doing is moving towards an agile approach, which says we will review what we did yesterday to decide what we do tomorrow, that is a part of inclusive decision making. So I think the tone, the expectation takes it from micromanagement to inclusive decision making. And I think the values of the organization, the behavior of the leaders sets the tone of which side that is going to be.
Yeah, it takes a lot of, I mean, leadership really just is a mission of individual growth, and then anything else that comes from that will be felt. You know, it's that's the hardest pill to swallow is why is this not working? It might just not be working because you're not there yet, right?
Yeah, it could be, yes.
Like very, very possibly.
Yeah. And I think as leaders, we cast very long shadows and we forget about that. So it's something that I'm constantly reminding myself that if I walk into a room, it's because I wanted to grab a pen. But if I'm walking into a room and 6 people are there and they're not expecting to see me, have I now just created a, our directors walked into the room? What does that mean? Have I walked in and not said hello to anybody? So I think, yeah, it's a constant learning journey. And as much as we talk about different models, we talk about different theories, none of it is a playbook. Because you can have different personalities in a different organization and something happens in their life and it completely changes tomorrow and you as a leader have to adapt to it. So I think what I would recommend is people read my book, read other people's books, read 20 books, read 100 books, take the learning, take the skills from those, adapt them to your authentic leadership self, and use them when you need to and adapt them and change them when you need to, because all of the humans you're coming into contact with all of the time are not going to be from a mold. They are not going to fit what the textbook said. They're individuals. They have got complicated lives. So it's about being self-aware enough to be able to respond. So it's reflection of your hardened relational skills, recognition of your impact and regulation of your behavior. You do that in the moment. You do that throughout the day. You do that at the end of the week, at the end of the year. And that's that constant journey. Because if we want to be in relation with others, that's what it's going to take.
Every time. And I think some of the best advice that I got, and also anyone watching, please go to Knowing Self, Knowing Others, and pick up Madame's book called Superhighway about leadership. It's going to benefit your life tremendously in terms of really all the stuff that we're talking about, I'm sure. I think the reality of setting on a path to actually be a leader tends to be something that we kind of pick up the bug like earlier on in our life when we realize that we have the ability to communicate with people, and there's like this chunk of time that it becomes very fun to manipulate those conversations and just interact. I'm remembering my childhood and just like, things that I said in classes that perhaps made people laugh, or things that I did in little groups that brought people together. All of these like little interactions, they were fun. They were genuinely enjoyable moments for me because I was like, wait a second, what I do actually affects the world around me. There's a process of learning that about self, and then it ends up turning into, well, crap. Now I know that I'm capable of doing this. Okay, how do I balance wanting to do this and my personal life, right? Like, and I think the best comment that I got from my practice management professor in dental school was that if you are a different person at your business than you are at home, there's probably something wrong. And the reality of that, I think, just comes up with authenticity. Really, it's like if we experience being misaligned at work and at home, then we experience a lot of stress as leaders, and a lot of kind of unnecessary stress, because sometimes the best things to do in life, it seems like, are very intuitive. The most efficient things to do in life are very intuitive. And when we learn all of these different systems and equations to apply to our life, sometimes it breaks that alignment. And then we have to recalibrate and be like, wait a second, what part of the system broke that alignment? Am I sure I'm changing as an individual, right? I want to grow as an individual, but am I leaving this part of myself behind as I'm growing, or is it off kilter? And you'll feel this when you fail, especially you'll feel this, because that recuperation is going to take longer if it's not in alignment.
Yeah.
The analysis is going to be all funky if it's not in alignment. You'll realize there's parts of your life that just don't make sense, with where you want to go. So I don't know, what your thoughts on that?
Authenticity is, we're talking a lot about it, but what we often don't do when you see posts on LinkedIn, or you see articles in Substack or Facebook or wherever you may find them, we're often not given the definition of authenticity to go with it. Because I think we've gone from authenticity to authenticity, which seems to have really lost that central core meaning. So I think there's authenticity at our periphery, which is very superficial. And maybe those are the things that you don't want to bring to work on a Monday morning from what you did on a Saturday night, because actually that being authentic in those different contexts on that periphery really isn't going to help you move forward in your career, or one's going to be out of alignment with the other. I think when we talk about authenticity, we need to restate the definition is about what your values and your beliefs and your principles are. I think those are the things that you need to be able to ensure that you're working towards, whether that's at home, whether that's in the world of work. Those core things that are fundamental to you, they're the things that you don't think about. They're the intuition, they're the gut feeling that you just know. And sometimes it's quite difficult to articulate if you haven't worked through a process that allows you to articulate what the authentic you is. So I think we need to be taking authenticity back to that core of us and doing that reflection work to understand, who am I? What is the authentic me? Those are the things that I want to take into my world of work, because actually there might be a particular behavior that I do on a Wednesday night that actually isn't appropriate for work on a Friday morning. But actually that doesn't mean that your beliefs, values and principles change. It's just the things that you do. So let's not confuse them with activities. So let's think values, beliefs, principles, and not activities. Activities do not necessarily make us the authentic us, and sometimes they can really hamper our reputation within the world of work. And when we want to be having good relationships with people, but they've heard our reputation first, that's not going to help us. So be very clear about who the authentic you is and what your choices are and your behavior in terms of the activities that you do that demonstrate that.
It reminds me of the Jim Rohn quote, the classic, if you work hard on your career, you will make a living, which is fine. If you work hard on yourself, you will make a fortune, which is super fun. And at the end of the day, if any of us is trying to find that authentic self, I think, yeah, we really do need to sit down and write out some of those qualities that we really value in ourselves, and those identifying characteristics, like, am I an artist? Am I a speaker? Am I a strategist? You know, any of these things, writing them down is the first step, in my opinion, to saying, okay, this is something that I want to be, at the very least, something that I aspire for in my life. But I will say that action is very, very important. I will say that it's not enough to write these things down and to believe that we will grow in them. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to say to ourselves, okay, what are the actions that I need to take in order to become more of this?
Yeah.
And really, it's just data, right? Like, at the end of the day, we're going to, how we think about ourselves is based on how we act. And if we don't have the data that supports that you're an artist, or you're a speaker, or you're someone that is healthy, or anything, right? If we don't have the actions of literally just going to the gym, eating the right food, sitting down and spending time to create that artwork, right? We can't believe that about ourselves, and there is no way in hell that we can sustainably get anyone else to believe that about us.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it's
whatever,
very, like, you'll find out who someone is based on the way that they act anywhere in life.
Yeah, definitely. And life, whether we are thinking about our workplaces, our leadership, our careers, our life outside of work, it's all a journey, and you don't journey anywhere if you stand still. So you have to move, or you'll be taken along with the crowd, and that may not be the direction you want to go. So I think probably comes back to where we started this conversation, saying you have to have tenacity and perseverance and a bit of resilience too. But you need to have done that work to understand what are your values, to be able to demonstrate those through your activities. So maybe reflection, maybe creativity are your values, and you do that through your artwork, or maybe creativity because you want to be a graphic designer, or whatever that might be. So yeah, it's a journey. It's all a journey, and we are learning every day. But you've got to be on that journey, otherwise somebody's going to take you along.
I honestly could not have said it better myself. It's a real pleasure to have a chat with someone that's clearly having the real conversations about leadership and social interaction. It's just talking to you, just, you know, we've talked on and off, you know, over text and stuff, and it's amazing the work that you're doing. Seriously.
Thank you.
Because anyone that has the ability to go and check out Dr. Nia Thomas's podcast or her book, Superhighway, I would strongly suggest trying to get on these bandwagons, get on these movements of leaders trying to help each other, because the best leaders hire leaders, you know, because we don't want to do all the damn work. It makes more sense to hire people that are motivated to take the actions, to do the things without being told. And networks like this are going to make all the difference in terms of building ourselves and also getting to those people that we want in our corporations and our companies. So thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. I really appreciate it. Do you want to continue? Do you have other things you want to talk about, or do we want to?
I think we've had a great conversation. I think it's been really, really good. I've loved it. It's been great.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. Remember that you can follow this podcast on your favorite podcast player and watch it on YouTube. If you want to know more about self-aware leadership, you can buy Dr. Nia Thomas's book, The Self-Awareness Superhighway, charting your leadership journey on Amazon as a Kindle book, hardback, or paperback. You can also order it through high street bookstores like Waterstones, Foyles, Blackwell's, and Barnes & Noble. You can also buy the accompanying Reflections Journal on Amazon. If you want to access the free Self-Awareness Compass quiz to assess your self-aware leadership with the help of constructive feedback from your friends and colleagues, go to www.ksko.co.uk and check out the resources. Looking forward to having you on our learning journey on the next episode of the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. I've been Francesca, your AI presenter, and it's been a pleasure to be with you today.